Why was a former Celtic handcuffed at an airport and taken away like a fugitive? The headlines only scratch the surface. What really happened to Marcus Morris Sr. might just be one of the most unexpected off-court stories involving a former Boston Celtics player in recent years. Arrested at a Florida airport under felony fraud allegations tied to unpaid gambling debts, Morris's name suddenly shifted from ESPN panels back to the front page for all the wrong reasons. But the situation may not be as black and white as it seems, and Celtics fans have more reason to be intrigued than ashamed. As Marcus waited at a Broward County terminal, likely just looking to catch a flight and continue life post-NBA, police moved in. According to court records, he was wanted for passing a bad check to a Las Vegas casino, a claim that immediately triggered shockwaves across the basketball world. A 13-year NBA veteran being accused of something this serious, especially someone who wore the green and white with pride from 2017 to 2019, felt like a surreal twist in the script. But here's where the narrative takes a turn that no one saw coming. His agent, Yoni Noy, and his twin brother Markieff Morris didn't wait for the media to spin the story. They fired back fast and hard. According to Noy, there was no fraudulent check, no shady behavior, no criminal mastermind behind the curtain. Instead, what triggered the arrest was an old casino marker above $1,200, a figure that to any NBA veteran is practically pocket change. Noy described the situation as absolute insanity, and not the scandalous act that headlines have suggested. And that raises a critical question, one that goes beyond the player himself. Why does a relatively minor casino debt result in a full-on airport arrest? Are ex-athletes being targeted under high-profile pretenses to send a message or grab headlines? For Celtics fans, it's tempting to look away from this story. Marcus Morris wasn't just another name in the rotation. He was the heart, the grit, the player who stood toe-to-toe with LeBron in the 2018 Eastern Conference Finals and made TD Garden erupt with his fearless presence. He represented toughness, resilience, and intensity. This arrest threatens to stain that image. But should it? Or should we ask if the real issue is how quickly narratives are twisted the moment a player steps away from the court? Marcus had recently become a media analyst, adding insight and personality to ESPN and Yahoo Sports broadcasts. His transition from player to voice of the game was happening in real time. Now that shift is at risk. But maybe this is where things get more interesting. Because if Morris's version is true, if this was a legal technicality dressed up as scandal, then the story isn't about downfall. It's about redemption, misunderstanding, and how fast public perception can change. What no one seems to be talking about is the bigger question. How many other former NBA players are walking around with unresolved casino markers? And more provocatively, how much of this is the consequence of a sports culture that glorifies risk, competition, and high-stakes pressure, only to abandon athletes once they leave the court? Morris's case isn't just a legal headline. It's a warning sign, not just for him, but for every player who's ever worn a jersey, cashed a contract, and walked into a casino thinking the night was just for fun. And if the allegations are ultimately dismissed or proven inflated, could this even reopen doors for Marcus Morris in the NBA or in broadcasting? Could this be the dramatic low point that leads to a surprising high? The deal looked clean. The intentions made sense. But now, behind the polished front office narrative, something feels off. Celtics Nation might not realize it yet, but a silent gamble is unfolding inside TD Garden. And it's not about injuries or rookies. It's about Anthony Simons. He's set to pocket over $27 million this season. But here's the question nobody wants to ask. What if Simons ends up being the highest-paid bystander in the league? This isn't just about money. It's about identity. The Celtics are fresh off a championship run, armed with a legacy to protect and a culture built on effort, defense, and sacrifice. So how does a high-volume shooter who has never once tasted postseason success fit into that equation? And more importantly, who decided he should be the one to replace Drew Holiday, one of the most complete guards in the league? Let's rewind. The original trade between Boston and Portland included valuable draft picks. But after a closer look at Drew's physical, those picks evaporated. In the end, the Celtics received only Simons, a guard known for lighting it up on lottery teams but never pushing them forward. Now he's dropped into the most demanding basketball environment in the world. But the concern isn't whether Simons can play. It's whether his style fits at all with what Boston stands for. Simons thrives when he has the ball in his hands. But Boston's engine is driven by Tatum, Brown, and the fluid movement orchestrated by Mazzulla's spacing-heavy offense. Where exactly does a ball-dominant guard who averaged nearly 18 shots per game in Portland fit into that structure without derailing it? He's not a floor general. He's not a two-way weapon. And he's never been held accountable on a contending roster. There's a deeper problem brewing. If Boston tries to win, Simons could clog the offense. If they pivot toward development, he could win just enough games to ruin their lottery odds. Either way, his presence risks trapping the Celtics in the very place championship teams fear the most: irrelevance. But maybe that's where this gets interesting. What if Brad Stevens didn't bring Simons in for what he can do now, but for what he can be flipped into later? Could Simons be a placeholder contract, a financial tool in disguise, giving Boston the leverage to chase a mid-season star once the market shifts? Because if that's the case, then this move isn't about Simons the player. It's about Simons the asset. Still, even assets can backfire. For over a month, the front office has quietly shopped Simons across the league. And so far, silence. No leaks, no buzz, no traction. That's alarming, because if Boston can't flip him, they're stuck paying luxury tax money for a player who, in the best case, becomes the sixth man, and in the worst, becomes unplayable. Here's a twist nobody wants to acknowledge. What if the Celtics are intentionally slow playing the season? What if this is the strategic pause between title runs, a breathing window to manage wear and tear, test new combinations, and avoid pushing veterans too far ahead of the 2026 playoffs? If so, Simons may be serving a deeper purpose. A scoring buffer who absorbs minutes, hides long-term strategies, and maintains the illusion of competitiveness without overexerting the core. It sounds counterintuitive, but Stevens has done stranger things in silence. Remember when the Malcolm Brogdon trade collapsed at the last second and magically turned into the Kristaps Porzingis deal of the summer? There's one more layer. The 2026 draft is loaded. If Boston finishes just outside the playoff picture and lands a top 10 pick, the narrative shifts instantly. Suddenly, Simons wasn't a drain. He was a shield. But that all depends on the gamble paying off. If Simons shows flashes of maturity, reinvents himself as a low-usage sniper, or earns trust as a secondary playmaker, Boston will have pulled off one of the most subtle rebuild tools ever used by a title team. But if he plays as he always has, high volume and low impact, he becomes a live grenade on the roster. What if the Warriors' entire off-season plan collapses because of one missing Celtic? Al Horford, at 39, stands at the edge of two worlds. One, where he walks away as a champion, a respected veteran who defied time. The other, where he becomes the final piece that could reshape a desperate Warriors franchise searching for one last gasp of relevance. But as July slips away, something strange is happening. Horford remains unsigned, and his silence is shaking up more than just the Golden State front office. The expectation was simple. The moment free agency opened, Horford would leave Boston and head west to join Steph Curry in what many believed would be his farewell tour. All signs pointed in that direction. Golden State needed a stretch five. Horford fit the mold. There were whispers from ESPN's Anthony Slater that Horford was central to their off-season strategy. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. Now, the curiosity is turning into confusion. Why hasn't Horford signed? Is he stalling because of retirement? Or is there a deeper reason why the deal still hasn't happened? Could it be that he's watching the chaos in Golden State and quietly realizing that leaving Boston might not be the right way to end his career? Let's not forget, Horford was critical in Boston's title run, playing extended minutes when Kristaps Porzingis went down. He took on superstar assignments defensively. He hit momentum-shifting threes. And he anchored the second unit with maturity no box score could fully capture. Still, Brad Stevens made it clear early in the offseason that Horford was unlikely to return. Tatum's Achilles injury changed Boston's long-term strategy, and the front office prioritized youth and durability. For now, it looks like the Celtics are ready to move on. But what if Horford isn't? There's a growing theory that Horford's delay isn't about contracts or fit. It's about purpose. After almost 2 decades in the league, he's not just looking for minutes. He's looking for meaning. And while the Warriors might offer a flashy brand, they don't offer certainty. Golden State has become a puzzle. Jonathan Kuminga wants a payday but hasn't found his market. Klay Thompson is gone. Chris Paul is out. Draymond Green is aging and unpredictable. The Warriors need Horford more than he needs them. And he knows it. This is the trap. If Golden State lands Horford, they might salvage one last season of relevance. But if they miss, the entire off-season plan falls apart. And they're left scrambling in a conference that has gotten younger, faster, and more ruthless. Meanwhile, back in Boston, a quiet possibility lingers. What if Tatum's injury doesn't derail the season but simply slows it down? What if Horford, instead of leaving, waits until mid-season to rejoin the Celtics, stepping in when it matters most, just like he did in the playoffs? Imagine the twist. Horford reappears in green, rested, motivated, and ready for one last push toward Banner 19. This scenario would send a shockwave through the East. A mid-season reinforcement like Horford could balance Boston's rotation at a crucial moment, especially if injuries pile up again. And it would give fans a closing chapter they actually deserve. But here's a spicier thought. What if Horford is positioning himself to make a completely unexpected move? Not retirement, not the Warriors, but a surprise contender no one is talking about. A team with a hole at center, cap space to burn, and playoff aspirations waiting to explode. The longer Horford waits, the more power he gains. He's no longer just a veteran searching for a role. He's become the most mysterious lever in the league's balance of power. Wherever he lands will feel the impact. But if you're a Celtics fan, this isn't the time to panic. This is the time to observe. Because whether Horford returns to Boston or not, his future is tied to the past he helped build. And if the door is still even slightly open, Brad Stevens might not be done. Did the Hawks just trade for a superstar they don't even believe in? Kristaps Porzingis, once hailed as a unicorn in the NBA world, has found yet another home. But behind the headlines of his arrival in Atlanta, there's something far more unsettling brewing. The Hawks made the deal. They celebrated it publicly. But behind closed doors, the writing is already on the wall. They don't trust him. Not fully. Not when it matters most. Let's be honest. The Hawks didn't just acquire a top-tier stretch five. They inherited a medical mystery wrapped in highlight reels. And the moves they've made since then scream one thing louder than any press conference ever could. They are preparing for Porzingis to miss a lot of games. The optics are jarring. You'd think a franchise trading for a player of Kristaps's caliber would go all in, build around him, make him the cornerstone of a new era. But Atlanta is doing the opposite. They're doubling down on insurance policies, quietly hunting for big men, circling veterans, retaining backups, acting like the biggest addition to their roster is already a future problem. Why would they do that unless they know something the public doesn't? There's no denying Porzingis' upside. He turned Boston into a 5-out offensive nightmare. His ability to pull bigs away from the rim created new lanes for Tatum and Brown. Defensively, he was the surprise anchor, protecting the paint while allowing the perimeter to fly. He was the unlock, the luxury, the reason Boston's system felt like it reached its final form. But then came the breakdowns. Not just one, not just minor tweaks. It was a parade of injuries and mysterious absences. Calf, foot, illness, rust, load management. In the moments Boston needed him most, he became a question mark. And that's not something a championship contender can afford, especially not 2 years in a row. So when Boston needed to cut costs, Porzingis wasn't just expendable. He was predictably expendable. Enter Atlanta. Hungry to climb out of mediocrity, desperate to find something that could maximize Trae Young and maybe, just maybe, spark a deeper playoff run. On paper, Porzingis is perfect. But the Hawks didn't just bring him in and call it a day. They kept Onyeka Okongwu, who was already being groomed as the next starter. They added young pieces, they scouted depth bigs, and they immediately began calling around the league for reinforcements. It was less of a welcome party and more of a contingency plan being triggered. And that says something massive. Because if Atlanta actually believed that Porzingis could be a 65-game centerpiece, why hold on to so many backup options? Why urgently chase a reunion with 38-year-old Al Horford, a player who left the Hawks years ago and seemed destined to retire a Celtic? Why the scramble? Because they're preparing for a reality that Celtics fans know too well. Porzingis is elite when healthy, but that version doesn't last. And the Hawks, perhaps quietly, are acknowledging this in real time. Now comes the twist that Celtics fans should pay attention to. This trade may have looked like a subtraction, but it might be Boston's most brilliant long-term play yet. Porzingis helped deliver a title. His job was done. Moving him allowed Boston to breathe financially, pivot younger, and open the door to future moves that don't rely on a player whose body is always on the edge. Brad Stevens wasn't just cutting salary. He was cutting uncertainty. And for all the noise coming out of Atlanta about how excited they are, their actions suggest they already missed the comfort of stability. Because once the honeymoon ends, and Porzingis sits in a hoodie watching games from the bench, reality will crash down hard. The real winner of this trade might not be the team that got Porzingis. It might be the one that let him go at exactly the right time.